Well, back from a brief publishing break in which lots of things were happening all the way across the region, African Energy actually opened with what I think is one of the more worrying but important uh, trends of the moment, and that is the tension between Algeria and Morocco. I'm Jon Marks, the editorial director of African Energy, but I'm also a very long-standing North Africa watcher. Indeed, before the shooting broke out in Guerguerat on the southern border of the disputed Western Sahara, where controlled by Morocco and Mauritania last November, I believe I was with the last group of people who were actually shot at in the Western Sahara conflict. So it's something I've watched for a long time. I'm always very concerned. So that's what we led on, focused on Algeria breaking diplomatic relations with Morocco, the many reasons for that, the internal dynamics, as well as the more outstanding diplomatic issues, and of course looked at it in the context of the gas supply routes that lead through Morocco from Algeria, but via the GME pipeline to Europe. An important but not overwhelming source of supply of gas to Europe now, but an important one, and of course an important source of supply to Morocco. So we had a substantial amount of analysis on this, accompanied by a really beautiful map from our peerless map maker, David Burles. And the conclusion is, well, there's much to play for in terms of energy supply. There's reasons for Spain to be concerned, and Morocco, but Algeria has other routes forward for its gas. And Morocco can look towards securing new gas supplies, either through liquefied natural gas or possibly even through a new gas find. There will be a lot of interest, I think, in the well that Chariot Oil and Gas is planning to spud in December. But overall, I would say the internal battles in Algeria and Morocco, of course, which will have a new government following elections this week, are a cause for concern, and it's certainly one that African Energy will continue to look at. We also followed up on Zambia and the IMF and looked at the wider energy transition issues around divestment out of gas, in which the Nigerian Vice President Yemi Osinbajo has made an interesting and critical intervention this week. And also at the funding, there's a large report by my colleague, David Slater, who is also a lead consultant on the Africa-EU Energy Partnerships, European Financial Flows on SDG 7 in Africa report. And that basically shows, as I think we know well, but with some interesting granularity, the fact is that to meet the SDG 7 target of universal energy access for all by 2030, a huge amount more still needs to be done, and that will involve substantial new financing. Question is now, COP26 approaches, a lot of things are being said, but can those good words be converted into real projects and big ticket financing? We shall see. In the power section, we looked at Libya's solar development, an interesting story. Dispatches from Egypt, from Nigeria, where President Buhari, coming towards the latter period of his tenure, is trying to leave a legacy and has sacked his several ministers, including the power minister, Salim Eman, to try and do that. We had a report from Ethiopia on the GERD, and indeed asked, how big is the Grand Renaissance Dam? Not as big as most people think. And we went to South Africa again. So much to talk about. Highlights would be another huge loss reported by Eskom, and that the approval of plans to build 2.5 gigawatts of what they're now calling sort of affordable modular nuclear, which the regulator NERSC has given the go-ahead for. We also had a substantial amount of stories in the upstream, and I'm delighted that our hydrocarbons editor, James Gavin, is with me. James, this week you've been looking at one of the big players in the African upstream, Angola, Côte d'Ivoire, where there's been a find of real potential significance, and South Africa.
Absolutely, yeah. Pleased to say the only shooting I've been covering is seismic shooting. So, and let's perhaps starting with Angola. I was just looking at some of the figures in the latest OPEC monthly bulletin, and it makes for rather grim reading, just seeing the monthly decline in production sort of slipped for July. It slipped below 1.1 million. So not a great story, and that's been going on for the last couple of years. So any sign of activity from Angola and from the regulator, the NPG, looking to start the process of licensing, bringing IOCs back in, is obviously a good thing, and there seems at least to be a few things happening on that front. So by the next issue of African Energy, we should at least know what kind of interest there's been in the latest licensing round, which bids are due in by the 20th on that. That's one thing. There's also
there's sort of a feeling, do you think, that with its new government and the fact that there's going to be winners and losers in the transition, and possibly that Angolan deep offshore remains sufficiently interesting to the super majors, that they will stay in there, whereas they'll pull out elsewhere, and perhaps Angola may be among the last producers standing. Is that how it feels to you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Angola, yes, the deep offshore, it's got it. So in this this battle for spoils, I think Luanda's got some aces up its sleeve. It hasn't, up until in recent years, it hasn't played them well. But I think if what we're seeing now is materializing things, I think that will be one of the winners in this this transition game. And there will be losers.
And they're also, of course, on the downstream side, trying to revive their and get moving their refinery projects.
Yeah, that's right, Lobito. There's firm dates on that, and and that forms part of a much wider revamp of the downstream there. It's been cataclysmic for their finances for such a major oil producer to be importing fuel and products. I think it's what they're planning makes clear sense if they can get that off the ground as part of the wider the Cabinda refinery. There's a few things going on. I think they'll be in much better shape, and they can finally look forward to stopping those seriously expensive imports. So yeah, upstream and downstream, Angola's starting to look a little better than it has been. So that's one good thing. Côte d'Ivoire looks like ENI has done it again. So almost 10 years since the Mamba South discovery, and then 5 years. Every 5 years, they seem to be coming up with something big in Africa. 5 years after the Zohr discovery in Egypt, of course. So this time, the last two big finds there were gas. This is an oil discovery. It clearly held it back. They've held it back, the announcement, for a little bit. Perhaps looking to firm things up, but they appear confident in it. 2 billion barrels of oil. It's about 60 kilometers off the coast. So that's another piece of good news, and it seems to go against some of the recent trend. I mean, as we noted there on our piece, the Cairn Energy has relinquished a couple of its blocks. So overall, it hasn't been a great story there. Production sort of below, seems to be between 30 and 40,000 barrels a day, not great. This would seem to herald a much stronger future for Ivorian hydrocarbons. So much anticipation will be focused on Côte d'Ivoire. Of course, the proof will be in the pudding. But I think we are looking. I think so. So the energy ministers are suggesting that they'll be around. It would boost the discovery would boost proven reserves, which are currently estimated only around 100 million barrels. And there's other sort of recent awards. There's been so majors are in are sort of on the lookout for Côte d'Ivoire, and Total was awarded something within the last couple of years. So there's enough to give optimism that things there's enough to provide optimism that it will be more an active scene there, I think. The other piece of story of interest was in South Africa, where I spoke to Impact Oil and Gas, as an independent, very much focused down there, with a sort of charismatic CEO, Siraj Ahmed. Was an interesting guy to speak to. You know, he's saying again, it's going against the overall mood music of recent years, which has seen, obviously, as we know, majors divesting. He's just on a farm out with Shell. It's finally completed. It was sort of first trailed late last year, and he's saying there's enough up down there to really sort of secure that IOC interest. So yeah, don't write Africa off and say not South Africa. That's the mood, the message coming from Impact Oil and Gas, at least.
Well, it's interesting because, of course, Impact was there offshore Namibia, where they brought in Total, and of course, where that Venus 1 well that's going down is also, again, another one of those wells that's driving a lot of interest in the gas community, and suggests that there's a project that may well slot into a transition calendar if there's enough resources there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Well, thanks very much for that, James. Just to say, the issue, we also had a lot in our finance and policy. Mark Howard talked to players down in Zimbabwe, where, of course, Mark did his doctoral thesis on, knows the place well, and talked about some international arbitration around payments disputes with ZISA, the state utility, and its subsidiaries, that we put into the context of working in Zimbabwe with an analysis and indeed a brief history of the Zim dollar, its relationship with the US dollar, how the new Zimbabwean dollar, not to be confused with the old Mugabe era Zimbabwe dollar, but the Zimbabwean dollar might work, and what this means for people operating in the country. So that was interesting. We had more on the famous P&ID saga, as a London trial date is set. That one, of course, is where there's the claim that the Nigerian government failed to carry through commitments in a deal with some Dublin-based entrepreneurs, a $10 billion arbitrations there. Democratic Republic of Congo, of course, we covered that. Interestingly, based on the recent comments by the finance minister about how yet another, but not unexpected, review of minerals contracts was going to take place, and the Chinese contracts, the famous minerals for infrastructure contracts, would come into view. Not surprising, given that the change of government, we've seen DRC mining contracts revised before. It's always an important thing for all investors, and indeed all interested in that huge, wonderful, and so difficult country to look at. Finally, we ended with the African energy view. It was going to be about Mozambique or some transition issues, but the fact is that Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya's coup last Sunday in Conakry meant that we couldn't ignore this, and we should analyse a country that we at Africa Energy and indeed cross-border information follow a lot. Clearly, there's a lot of things to resolve. We're getting to know more about the incoming military regime. What is clear is that while people may not have wanted to protest with guns on the streets, there was spontaneous joy, particularly in some neighbourhoods at Condé being deposed. And I think the tone that we gave was that the intellectual opposition president with a really impressive Rolodex, who finally came to power in Guinea in 2010, was not by 2020, when he engineered the constitutional change in the third term, the same person, and the flaws within his regime have helped to stoke the way forward for the coup that followed. But it's not a happy event. And our view analysed those things, and it ended with a comment based on Doumbouya's initial television statement, which included lots for aficionadi of African coup d'etat. It was filled with a lot of the sort of statements that we've come to know. But he actually quoted Jerry Rawlings, who came into Ghana in a coup in 1979, and said, if the people are crushed by their elites, it is up to the army to give the people their freedom. And we concluded that history suggests that that is a big ask, in which the late Ghanaian president and many others have fallen short. There is a lot to play for in Guinea, starting with asking, is it a factionalized coup, or is there a national movement, particularly within the armed forces, behind it? Can the new regime, if it stays in power through its initial period, which seems likely, accommodate itself to an angry regional and international community? Guinea's been suspended already from ECOWAS, for example. And where does it leave Guinea's commercial partners, but even more so its population, who've seen rulers come and go, and many of whom are still waiting for a substantial improvement in their day-to-day living. So that's it. We'll be back again with another issue of African Energy in a fortnight. So thank you all for listening, and talk to you soon.